Game of Thrones was a pop culture phenomenon. If you weren't watching it, you were doing something wrong. Until the final season debacle changed everything, public opinion went down the drain. But then came the show that gave the universe a new life. In this video, we're going to take a look at everything House of the Dragon does better than Game of Thrones. So let's jump right into it. First up, the dragons. There are many differences between Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, but one of the biggest is their treatment of dragons. In Game of Thrones, dragons were introduced late in the first season and didn't play a major role in the story for some time. By contrast, in HOTD, dragons play an important role right from the start, since they are central to House Targaryen. This focus on dragons has allowed the show to explore their many facets, from their use in battle to their relationships with riders and the role they play in the kingdom. Not only are we getting much better CGI on the dragons, but there are also more of them, and we've already learned a lot more about how they are as a species. We have to hand this to House of the Dragon, because Game of Thrones could simply never. Next up, actually calling out the patriarchy. Game of Thrones was one of the most popular shows of all time, but looking at it as a whole, it had some major issues with misogyny and patriarchy. House of the Dragon, however, takes a different approach by showing just how deeply entrenched these systems are in Westeros. The show portrays this through characters like Alicent and Rhaenyra, whose relationship is deeply affected by the patriarchy. This theme can be seen throughout the series as a whole and is one of House of the Dragon's most compelling aspects, and it's not even subtle. Princess Rhaenys is a great symbol of that too. Not only does she make sure her own voice against the patriarchy is heard pretty much throughout the show, but she also calls it out whenever she sees it. Whether that's warning young Rhaenyra of how her position as heir would be challenged in the future, or telling Alicent how she's become a pawn to the men, the way House of the Dragon handled it is one of our favorite parts of the show. Then we've got not being black and white. In Game of Thrones, the characters were fairly one-dimensional if you really think about it. Cersei was the epitome of evil, Jon had a heart of gold, Dany mainly just wanted the Iron Throne at any cost, and well, you get the point. If it weren't for Tyrion, there wouldn't be much gray in the show at all. House of the Dragon, though, goes the complete opposite way. While this series is full of dark, evil characters like Otto Hightower and Larys Strong, it also features complex, morally ambiguous protagonists like Alicent, Rhaenyra, and Daemon. So you get to see depth and layers to every character that's on the screen, making things a lot more interesting overall. Let's not forget soaking up the sadness. Game of Thrones was a complex and gripping tale, but it often downplayed the tragic aspects of its story. Even if there was going to be an epically emotional goodbye, like everyone who died at the Red Wedding for example, or even Ned Stark, it would be over very quickly. Sure, we'd see the characters spiral into distress, but the sad scenes were over fairly fast. It was more about the shock factor than getting closure. Tragedies weren't really that much of a focus overall. House of the Dragon, however, embraces these tragedies, showcasing some of the saddest deaths in the series. As characters on both sides of the Civil War struggle through their losses, we see how tragedy has shaped them and fueled their motivations, not only giving us enough material to focus on during the death scenes, but also how those affected by the deaths deal with everything, not to mention all the feels. One of the things that we really have to appreciate on the show is the fact that the creative team behind House of the Dragon is taking a different approach to storytelling than Game of Thrones. They focus on complex characters and relationships that evolve over time. Their circumstances hurt both Alicent and Rhaenyra, and while they started off really strong, the situation overall takes a massive toll on their relationship over time. There's also Viserys, whose kingship is driven by love for his family. Daemon, who originally seems like a hedonistic character, shows moments of genuine emotion throughout the show, making him a more complex and engaging character than we've seen in Game of Thrones. With its focus on tragedy and emotional complexity, House of the Dragon brings you all the feels that Game of Thrones just glosses over most of the time. Up next, the shocking moments. Game of Thrones was known for its shocking and often violent content. While the show certainly had its share of memorable moments over the years, they began to feel more formulaic as time passed. Instead of earning these shocks through well-crafted storytelling or complex character development, the creators seemed to rely on them as a sort of shock value element, which made the show feel somewhat predictable and contrived. By contrast, the horror anthology series HOTD features a number of shocking moments that feel much more grounded and effectively earned. One example is Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding scene, which is marked by unexpected violence that feels genuinely shocking and surprising while not feeling random. Throughout its first season, HOTD skillfully builds tension and generates suspense, bringing us lots of powerful and memorable moments. Thus, while both shows certainly feature their fair share of shocking content, HOTD manages to use these moments more effectively and meaningfully than Game of Thrones. Now for actually being believable. Rhaenyra, Alicent, and Daemon are all complex and multifaceted characters whose motivations extend beyond simple bloodline rivalry. While Rhaenyra and Daemon were both groomed for the throne from a young age, their desire for power is driven by more than just ambition or a desire for control. Rather, they both understand what being monarch means and believe themselves to be more suited for the role than their rivals. Similarly, Alicent's motivations stem from her desire to protect her family, which her father has manipulated manipulated into a position of power. Despite this, she remains fiercely loyal to those closest to her and is driven by a desire to do what she believes is right. Overall, the conflicts between these three characters are more complex and nuanced than those of the main characters in Game of Thrones, making them a fascinating and engaging subject for discussion. Next up, diversity. Game of Thrones is widely criticized for its lack of diversity, with most of the main characters being white and male. However, House of the Dragon aims to address this issue by introducing a more diverse cast of characters, including the Velaryon family, a major house in Westeros, all super powerful people of color. The female characters in the show are also more complex and play important roles in the narrative, subverting traditional gender roles. In addition to making sure they're visually diverse, House of the Dragon is staffed by more female writers and directors than its predecessor, reflecting a greater commitment to diversity and bringing another layer of talent to the show, something that Game of Thrones severely lacked. Then, we've got the whole story. While we don't really want to go there, we have to. No one can deny that the ending of Game of Thrones just tanked the entire show and the impact it once had. The major reason for this was the fact that the showrunners ran out of the source material they were working with and had to come up with the ending on their own. This proved to be much harder than they had anticipated, and we all already know how that one played out. Martin's first book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series was published in 1996, more than 15 years before the final season of the hit TV show Game of Thrones. However, Martin did not provide a concrete plan for the ultimate storyline of the show, which resulted in storylines being cut or condensed, contributing to its lackluster finale. Fortunately, Martin released the book Fire and Blood in 2018, which was based on 2 previously released short stories. This gives the creative team behind Game of Thrones a clear roadmap for how they plan to approach ending the show, ensuring that all storylines are fully developed and resolved by the end. As a result, viewers can look forward to an epic conclusion that successfully ties up all the loose ends in this beloved series. Can't forget the iconic Targaryen brothers. While family has been the center of Game of Thrones as a whole, there's no denying that House of the Dragon has brought us the best brother dynamic of all time. The characters of King Viserys and his brother Prince Daemon are 2 of the most prominent characters in House of the Dragon. Played by actors Paddy Considine and Matt Smith, these brothers have very different personalities that create a lot of tension and drama within the show. Despite their differences, the brothers love each other very much and are determined to stay together. This emotional core lies at the heart of the show, especially in episodes 8 and onwards, as we see how it affects major story arcs such as political maneuvering and backstabbing. Perhaps the most powerful moment in the season happens in episode 8 when a dying Viserys goes to sit on the Iron Throne one last time. His brother is there to support him as he falters, bringing to light the deep bond between them. Finally, a backstory everyone was craving. The characters of House Targaryen are central to the hit TV show Game of Thrones. While viewers previously knew little about this family beyond their reputation for tyranny and power, the new series, House of the Dragon, delves deep into their history and explores them as complex individuals, humanizing these legendary figures. The show does a great job of making the Targaryens seem more exciting and interesting. They become characters that people really want to watch. And on that note, we'll wrap up today's video. Do you think House of the Dragon is truly better than Game of Thrones at its core? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. We'll see you in the next one.